Here is Brian Stelter. Now CNN is out there saying, oh, gee, we learned a lot about his infirmity. My gosh, this is shocking. Well, here's CNN back in June 19th, 2024. This is before the debate on these so-called cheap fake videos that the rest of the media was dishonestly using to portray Joe Biden as infirm. SOT 9.
We've been worried for years about AI deepfakes, that computer-generated images are going to trick people into believing something that's totally false. Cheap fakes are a little bit simpler. They're cheap. They're just distorted, out-of-context videos, chopped up in certain ways. That's what the Biden administration, the Biden campaign is so worried about right now. But make no mistake, they are worried about this. This is a real problem. This is not some made-up fiction. The videos are oftentimes made up, but the problem is real.
And now, here's more, okay? Because CNN today out there like, gee, oh, wow, they're interviewing Jake like this is all new to them. Let me just give you a couple of examples. August of 21, Chris Cillizza, he's upset because Republicans are hitting this issue. He says, to raise doubts in voters' minds about Biden and his age in particular, this is the sort of gross, lowest common denominator politics that drive people away from public life. Chris Cillizza got it so wrong. He's one of the only ones to actually come out because he had to go independent. He got fired from CNN to say, okay, sorry, I got it wrong. Now I would like to be one of the ones who apologize. We have that? Okay, let's watch.
This is a guy who is the president of the United States for 4 years and thought and ran for a second term, at which point he would have been in his mid-80s had he won and served. So that to me is a really serious conversation about how did we get to this point, given that there were a lot of signs that suggested that Joe Biden definitely should not have run for a second term. How did we get to this point? It's a media story.
We got here because of you.
It's a politics story. It's a sort of transparency story.
Because of you, Chris Cillizza, and CNN. Here's a couple more, Victor. July 12th, 2022. Not for nothing, but it was a month prior to that the Megyn Kelly Show did a full 2-hour show on Biden's mental decline, including by interviewing one of the foremost dementia experts in the world. But here's a month after that, CNN's John Harwood taking issue with the allegations that he was not cogent and capable. What's true is the presidency is a hugely taxing job mentally and physically, and that Joe Biden is old. What's not true is the trope pushed in conservative media that Biden is not currently mentally capable of doing the job. The president is engaged and acute. February of 23, John Avalon of CNN, Republican slurs that Mr. Biden is mentally impaired are fear-mongering politics. June 25th, 2024, 2 days before the presidential debate that would seal Joe Biden's fate, Oliver Darcy on CNN lamenting how for years MAGA media has been portraying Joe Biden as a senile, mentally incapacitated elderly man who cannot remember what he had for breakfast, let alone run the federal government. That might sound like an exaggeration to those who don't tune into Fox News or listen to talk radio, but it's been a real and constant theme in the right-wing media universe. To support the narrative, these outlets and personalities have seized on Biden's verbal gaffes while ignoring Trump's and presented out-of-context video clips to their large audiences, a deceptive but effective strategy. That's CNN. That was CNN, who now is using the Jake Tapper book to act like the guy in Casablanca. Shocked, there's gambling going on in here.
Yeah, and these are the same people, if you recall, in 2019 and 20, they hauled up, and the media went gaga, they hauled up a Yale psychiatrist, Bandy Yee, and they brought her before the Senate, and she telediagnosed Donald Trump as mentally unfit. And she wrote a book about it, and they lauded her, and she was all over the media that she said that they needed an intervention. And then we also had this weird psychodrama between Andrew McCabe and Rod Rosenstein. They were going to Rod was going to wear a wire, and the FBI interim director was going to go in and trap Donald Trump and record him speaking, and this was going to be proof that he needed to be 25th Amendment removed. And all of the left media got in this fury, and finally Donald Trump took the Montreal Cognitive Assessment because he was so worried that people had started with this narrative. And so these were the same people who thought there was nothing unethical about diagnosing somebody as cognitively unfit who obviously wasn't. If you look at those long rally speeches and constant interviews and impromptu and ad hoc repartee that Trump did every single day, 20-hour days.
Let me just tell you one thing on that, Victor, and then I'll give you back the floor. 2 weeks after Jake Tapper had on Laura Trump and gave her such a hard time saying, like, how dare you try to cognitively diagnose Joe Biden. 2 weeks after that, he had on Mary Trump and allowed her to make the case that they ought to be able to diagnose Donald Trump and his, weird mental problems in her mind because it was obvious and because she had some sort of a background in psychiatry or psychological, whatever. 2 weeks later, he let Mary Trump do it.
Yeah, and I think when you look, I went back and looked at a lot of the debates, and when you look at the 2020 debates on the Democratic primary, when Joe Biden would say things, the other candidates were stunned sometimes. They had no comprehension of what he was saying. And if you looked at Bernie and Buttigieg were the only people who had won a caucus. And then all of a sudden, Jim Clyburn changed the South Carolina date. Presto, he was gone. Buttigieg stepped down, Warren stepped down, Sanders stepped down, and then it was old Joe Biden. And then all these news came out that he was actually a moderate. And then he went in the basement, and that was a useful vessel. And that's why they really didn't have an open primary. They didn't have an open primary in 2024. They put Harris without an open primary. He lived by he was nominated by a coup and he was deposed by a coup. But the point is, what we thought was a debility, and he was kind of an empty vessel and struggling with cognitive problems. I think the hard left wing of the Democratic Party found this useful and advantageous because they could wheel him out in certain cases. He could say stuff. And then if you look what he did at the border, we have never had anybody who destroyed a border and invited in 10 million people. It was just lunatic. We never had anybody who's printed $7 trillion. We never had anything like, since maybe 75 in Vietnam, anything comparable to that Afghan pullout. It was just Mayorkas. It was in like an alternate reality listening to Mayorkas talk for 4 years. And so they got what they wanted. That's what my point is. I really think they found him useful because he put a thin veneer for as long as he could maintain it. And then when he was no longer useful and they said, you know what, we can't push this left-wing agenda anymore because he can't even function as a veneer, they got rid of him. They just deposed him. They just called him in a room and said, you're done. And if you complain, we made you, we got you nominated, and we have the right to get rid of you. And then there was no primary, there was no other candidates. I think Joe Manchin for a nanosecond said he might consider running, and it was over like that. And
look what they did to Dean Phillips. Look what they did to Bobby Kennedy. They were like, There will be no comers whatsoever. We've got our man. And only when he imploded on stage in front of our very eyes live did they have to admit the jig was up. Two things I want to show you. First, I mentioned that soundbite on CNN. This happened on CNN in 2020, where he could not function in talking about the coronavirus. Watch this.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
Oh my God! And then there's this. So to the point you were just making about who was governing the country. Who really was the president. President Trump weighed in on this a bit yesterday. He's on Capitol Hill trying to get support for his big, beautiful budget bill. And he took a moment to make the following point. Watch this.
Look, it's a very sad thing what happened, but we're going to start looking into this whole thing with who signed this legislation. Who signed legislation opening our border? I don't think he knew. I said there's nobody that would want an open border. Nobody. And now I find out that it wasn't him. He auto-penned it. Who was operating the auto-pen? This is a very serious thing. We had a president that didn't sign anything. He auto-penned almost everything. He opened the borders of the United States of America. And I kept saying, who would do such a thing? Allowing criminals to pour in from all over the world. You know who signed it? Radical left lunatics that were running our country, and the Autopen signed it. And they didn't want him, and they were disappointed in getting him because they wanted Bernie Sanders. And then after about 2 weeks, they said, wait a minute, this is a gift. He'll do anything.
That's amazing. Victor, that's basically what you were just saying. The president totally agrees.
He was absolutely right. And that is the biggest scandal. And I think they need to call in everybody on every pardon and ask who operated the auto pen, who was there, and
Yes.
what they did. They need to do that, and they need to do it right away.
This July, there is a global summit of BRICS nations in Rio de Janeiro. The bloc of emerging superpowers, including China, Russia, India, and Iran, are meeting with the goal of displacing the U.S. dollar as the global currency. They're calling this the Rio Reset. As BRICS nations push forward with their plans, some worry global demand for U.S. dollars will decrease, bringing down the value of the dollars in your savings. While this transition, if it happens, would not happen overnight, the Rio Reset could mark a pivotal moment. So learn if diversifying your savings into gold is right for you. Birch Gold Group can help you move your hard-earned savings into a tax-sheltered IRA in precious metals. Claim your free info kit on gold by texting MK to the number 989898. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, let Birch Gold arm you with a free, no-obligation info kit on owning gold before July and the Rio Reset. Text MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.